Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening. I can't see you, but I think you can see me. This is not usually the platform I present on, so I hope you'll be gentle with me. I think we've got it wired up. Um, I have a lot to cover in our 45 minutes together, and so I'm going to jump right back in here. Um, If you have a comment or anything you'd like to add, feel free to put that in chat. I I might not be answering a ton of questions in chat unless we have a few minutes at the end, but please go ahead and write thoughts and questions in chat, and I'll do my best to get to them. Um, I'm going to change the view here so that I'm little in the corner and you can see the slides much better because this is a really visual presentation. I'm guessing you landed here because you're interested in exploring loose parts with infants and toddlers. So I know you want to see the photos and the ideas that are hopefully embedded in this presentation. So I'll stay down here in the corner and you can enjoy the images. Um, Quickly, my name's Tracy Johnson. I work with West Ed and the Program for Infant Toddler Care, and I support our statewide in California, statewide training and technical assistance services to all and any programs who serve infants and toddlers. I've been in the field for over 40 years suddenly upon my last birthday. So I've had a lot of experience with this age group, and they are my favorite people on the planet. So I hope you'll get a little inspiration from our time together and some ideas. Um, I'm going to be integrating and embedding some early math concepts clearly into our presentation today, because the truth is here with loose parts, children, very young children, can explore all the early math concepts through playing with these materials. So we'll be talking about ways that they'll explore counting and sorting and classifying and playing with patterns as they integrate or play with these loose parts. Okay, let's get going. So right now, everybody's using the term loose parts. Over my career of 4 decades in the field, we probably called these things other things like uh, great stuff or open-ended materials, or what I often call them are found in free materials. All we really mean by loose parts is that they are open-ended, multifaceted, that the object itself can be interacted with and played with in numerous different ways. The child is not in any way told how to play with the objects. So we're going to be touching on a variety of loose parts and how they can benefit the child, and especially in their understanding of some of the early math concepts. And I'm going to be flipping my papers here. This slide I'm going to land on for a little bit because there are some important considerations when using loose parts, and very crucial if you're working with children birth to 36 months. You know, they are still very exploratory learners, and so whatever you put out is going to go right in their mouth. That is to be expected. It is to be planned for. I really want to encourage you to really review the loose parts that you're thinking about adding to your program or bringing in, especially if they're new and the children are very enthusiastic about them. So safety and supervision is key. That's the absolute bottom line. If you have any concerns about a loose part, that it would be chokeable, too small, if there is a level of, you can't wash it, or it can be just thrown away after use. All of these things are really, really crucial before you add anything to your environment that we would call loose parts. Um, I think just to touch on the substance of them, and that means what are they made out of? What are these loose parts? These are clearly made out of wood. These are like curtain rings, and they're very smooth, light wood. Excellent for this age group. And I know we could wash them, we could use them for many, many days. There is a great number of them here. And again, if you're talking about infants and toddlers, specifically toddlers, quantity is everything with our little friends. They want a lot of what you have to offer. So you wouldn't just put out 4 rings here. That's not going to do anybody any good, right? They need a lot of loose parts. So quantity is important, and I'll give you some ideas about how to get quantity, a lot of something for very little cost. Um, so important considerations there. Be careful with what the objects are made out of. If it might be a metal thing, you want to make sure it's safe for them to chew on. Size, make sure it can't fit in that choke tube that we basically you could do that with a toilet paper tube. So really consider those elements before you add anything to the environment. Okay. I'm going to get back to family and culture in just a sec, but I'm going to pop through here. I think it's worthwhile to consider, how do you display these loose parts? How do you put into your environment? It doesn't matter what your environment is, family childcare, center-based care, maybe you're a nanny, it doesn't matter the where, but think about how you display these loose parts. I've given you here 3 different ideas about how, and these are in centers and family childcare homes, about how to display what you might be wanting to offer the children, these loose parts. Your display is going to affect how they play with the objects. It absolutely is. On the left here, we have the back. It's very simple. The back of a low toy shelf, and the provider just added felt to the back there, made sure it was really adhered strongly. I don't know, glue gun or whatever. And then she put just a little tag of Velcro on these various lids. And there's a party. Toddlers in particular will spend all day pulling Velcro attached things off of felt and just simply enjoying the sound of that. I love the sound of Velcro as it's being pulled off anything. So that's a super simple way to display, if you will. Here we have just those little canisters filled with material that is glued in there. The children can't get to it, but the provider just put a magnet on the back of these 3. So the children can pull them off this metal edging here and move them around and reattach them. And again, it's a element of how you display the materials, how you put them out for the children. Over here, we have yet another brilliant idea. These are those tap lights. The provider went out to the dollar store and got about 5 or 6. This metal sheet is covering up an open fireplace in her home. So it both provides safety because they can't climb in the fireplace, but it also is an element of loose parts. So the children can move these around and reattach them, and it makes it all very, very interactive. So bottom line with loose parts is the child's in charge and we're kind of the host. So keep that in mind as we talk about how to share these loose parts with the children in your care. So going back again to one of the considerations when you add any, I don't care if it's loose parts or whatever, to your environment, consider the families in your group and the children, and how the first thing you need to consider is, will these loose parts, will these materials be aligned with the children's culture? Are they something that the child would engage with at home? Is it a familiar material? Conversely, you wouldn't add loose parts or any play materials to the environment if it would be disrespectful of anyone's culture. So that brings us to, and that's a whole nother workshop, but you won't see loose parts here being like dried beans or rice. We wouldn't add food to play with because for many people, that is a staple of their diet and it is not a toy to be played with. So just really consider your families in your care, what they're familiar with. Um, a wonderful way to engage families in gathering loose parts is to ask them, what does your child play with at home? And do you have a bunch of those things? So it might be a lemon tree, who knows what it is, but that would authentically invite them into your gathering of loose parts. So just hold that in your mind and consider how the children and families' culture is reflected in the materials you bring into your program. And I know you're doing this, so it's just a reminder that we always want to be conscientious of that element. So now I'm going to share with you just a couple ideas of loose parts, and they are going to maybe look incredibly simple, but the truth is, when we're talking about infants and toddlers, simple is fabulous. They do not need a lot of bells and whistles. The loose parts I'm going to share with you are safe, they're washable, they're you can get them in quantity, all of the considerations that I spoke of a few slides ago. And when we say, again, open-ended, it really has to do with the child in coming up to this, which is essentially some caps to bottles tied onto a green string. There's nothing about that that is there's nothing about that that is telling the child exactly what they are supposed to do to play with that. So it's it's about that the child engages with the materials in a way that interests them. Um, I'm just reading a comment. Sorry. So loose parts, again, just to kind of reflect again on what do we mean by loose parts? It is those materials that you probably have around your house, you can find in nature, which we'll go into. It's about the object being open-ended enough that the child's in charge of how they interact with that material. And they often, as you can see here, these loose parts are often not your typical toys. They are objects we find in the world, in our homes, and that's why some people, call them everyday treasures or just found in free objects. So again, I'm gonna keep moving on here. This is just another example of what we might consider a loose part. These are clothespins in a little wooden box with some containers. So and I don't use the word activity because loose parts are not about setting up an activity. It's more an invitation. So if the child approaches this, they will do whatever they'll do with it. And in the doing, they will be learning all kinds of key elements. Here, it could be a sorting activity or a counting activity. So each of these provides all kinds of different learning opportunities. So let's look at another couple ideas about loose parts. Oh, this one's one of my favorite. This was created by a very creative family childcare provider. And what I love about this, I'll explain it to you, is loose parts also can provide a level of challenge that is just right for the child. So you might be providing care for children across multiple ages. You might be a family childcare provider with an infant and a school-age child. Loose parts have the unique ability to meet the child where they're at developmentally. So, for example, this is simply one of those plastic baskets you get at the dollar store, and the provider just wove the string through the holes and made it tight. And so the challenge for the child is to take these little tied up pieces of fabric out between those strings or push them back in, depending on what they want to do with it. So she created a level of challenge that will meet each child where they're at. A baby might just shake this object. A baby might just put their mouth on the edge of it. An older child might start adding some more string to this toy, if you will. So that's one of the benefits also of loose parts is that they can meet the needs of a variety of ages. Tonight, we're talking specifically about infants and toddlers, but I know many of you care for perhaps more than just that age range. Let's see what else we have here. So a couple other just very simple examples. These are bottle lids, again, not chokeable, too big, and they pop right in this applesauce container. It is also, and on the right, we have simple cans that have been covered in paper. You could also leave those shiny because there's an element of reflection that's also engaging for children. They're not sharp. The provider would make sure the inside of that can is safe. But imagine you're a toddler, imagine you're 24 months old or 18 months old. To come upon such an engaging provocation or invitation that has, I don't know how many scarves you could stuff into these cans, but that age child is all about dumping. If you've lived and worked with toddlers, you know what I'm talking about. They're not so much about putting things back in, but they are all about taking things out. So in this way, they are playing around with spatial relationships. They are pulling the scarves out of these cans because you could fit a good 20 in there. I've done it. Another variation on this is simply to save your empty Kleenex boxes, tissue boxes, and just start collecting pieces of fabric or scarves, smash those in there. And again, you'll find that that activity is just joy for a toddler. They'll sit there for hours and just pull the scarves out of the box or out of the can. And as they're doing this, they are able to engage with all of these early math concepts, dumping and filling, more and less. How many can I fit in this can? Spatial relationships, quantity. It is all embedded in their exploration of something like that, trying to figure out what is full, what is more, what is less. All of these things can be explored in a simple can with scarves. Let's move on. One of the things I really love about loose parts is that they can be absolutely beautiful. They aren't garbage. They are not garbage. I find great beauty in many of these loose parts and found objects. So here on the left, we have our good old cardboard tube, which all of us have played with at some point. Eternally wonderful loose part. It is flexible. Children can put things in, take them out, roll them. Again, the loose part here is about the child being able to do whatever interests them with these materials. Nobody is telling them what to do with these tubes. Then on the right, we come back to my favorite object, which is napkin rings. So here you have a variety of napkin rings, excuse me, on a peg, which is probably a tie stand, but it's laying flat. You know, you repurpose a lot of things, so that's what that is. It's not something you go and buy at the toy store. But here we have in the napkin rings texture, shininess, we have smoothness, we have all kinds of opportunities. If you think with math concepts, again, all kinds of opportunities for the child to set up a pattern here, to sort them in the way that they find interesting, to put more on one peg or less on another. So again, incredibly simple materials, but highly interactive and embedded with all kinds of learning opportunities. Here's another one, and I know y'all have played with these and brought them into your program, but it bears repeating or refreshing your memory. This is a very simple on the left, muffin tin. It happens to be square muffin tin. The shape is square. Again, if you think about what an infant or toddler might do, these the pile of colorful objects there are again napkin rings. They happen to be beaded napkin rings. So again, you need to make sure they're very sturdily on there and aren't going to pop off. But a one-on-one correspondence could happen here where the child goes, "Oh, I figured out one of these fits in each square. Can I fit two into a square?" So again, you have all kinds of math concepts with something as simple as napkin rings and a muffin tin. You're not teaching a lesson here. You're putting these materials out and you're allowing the children to do with it what they find interesting, but you are watching, you are observing, and you're taking some notes, hopefully, because your job is to continually bring in novelty when it's appropriate. You're not changing everything every day, but you're watching closely to see what is it about this muffin tin and these napkin rings that the children seem to be interested in. And then here we have on the right, the photo is simply frame edges. And so you go to your local framing store, I bet they will load you up with their leftover edging of their frames. And this is another wonderful example of how children of many ages could interact with these pieces. This looks like maybe it was a slightly older child who did this. Maybe a toddler's just going to put one on their shoulder and walk around or throw it in a bag and gather them. It doesn't matter so much what they do as long as they're the driver of how they play with these materials. Let's see what else we have. So this is one of my favorite quotes, and I think it really bears highlighting here. So I'll read it for you. Studies consistently show that a baby learns most and will likelier remember what they learn when they can control what's happening. It's those experiences they choose, not necessarily those chosen for them, that help them learn fastest and most completely. So that's a lot of what we look at in our role as infant toddler care teachers is, how can I help this child learn best? I'm not so much about the fast, but best and most completely. Bottom line, if you don't remember anything else from tonight, please remember that when the child chooses their own activity, they have deeper learning. It sticks with them. It's more in their memory. If they are told what to do with materials like this bowl of balls, this child would not have the depth of learning about those balls or whatever she's interested in about them if we were to tell her, do this, or you have an idea about how that child will play with that. So it's about the child being in charge. That's the way I like to think about it. The child chooses what they are ready to learn, and we provision and watch closely our environment. So you do have a job. It's not that you sit in the corner and knit. You have a very important role here. So some additional ways that loose parts support children's learning are these. Loose parts can provide the amount of novelty the child's ready for. That's a real key element in piquing a child's interest. Is it can't be the same old thing for 365 days. That's your job to really watch and add that novelty when you notice maybe interest is lacking or waning around an activity or materials. It's also an amazing way to add complexity and challenge, and I'll go into a couple examples of that with loose parts, that they again are so flexible and open-ended that they can provide complexity and challenge. And also, every time a child encounters these loose parts, they are in some way or another working on solving a problem. And the problem might be as simple as, what can I do with this? Or a question might be in the child's mind, huh, I've never seen this thing before. How does it taste? So those are toddler problems. They have a little hypothesis and they're going to investigate it. And it's our job to give them excellent materials to do their investigation. And loose parts do that for this age range. Just checking on my time. We're at 7:35. Okay, it goes so fast. This is just another example of bringing in some loose parts. This was actually an event I was part of. I was visiting family childcare up in provider up in Humboldt, had a relationship with her, brought in some actually bins from various hospital stays that I had known of friends. And these children, and I would call that a loose part. There were many of them. The children played with these materials, just empty bins, for about 2 hours. And these are very young toddlers. So don't tell me they don't have a good enough attention span. They absolutely do when the materials are of interest to them. Ultimately, these two good friends ended up sitting next to each other in the loose part bins. I really, really value being able to witness this kind of play and development, and I I see it more when they are using loose parts by a long shot. Loose parts also bring in a lot of flexibility to your environment. These are examples of just a tube and then an incline. This could be moved. Children could carry it around. The incline could be made steeper with another element on the chair. There's so many different ways you can engage with loose parts versus, say, a climbing structure that's been built and stuck in the ground. That's probably the most opposite of a loose part, if that helps you kind of think about what we're talking about here. So high flexibility is always what you want. And I don't just mean flexible because it bends. I mean literally mentally flexible. It can do so many things depending on what the child wants to do. Here's my favorite. I have been collecting coffee sleeves for about 35 years. And this is a quote from my mentor, Magda Gerber. Many of you may know her. She passed away a few years ago, but one of her mantras was, "The toy in the child's hand is alive." Here is simply, talk about quantity. I had probably 200 of these. They are simply coffee sleeves that you get at Starbucks around your hot coffee. And I collect them and I collect them. And I have had more amazing interactions with children when I pour out my collection of coffee sleeves and just observe them in their play. There's texture on the inside, they're bumpy, they rip them apart. Oh, I could go on for 12 years about the joy of the joy that they can bring to children. But that is truly a loose part, right? You wouldn't really think of coffee sleeves as a play material, but it's a perfect example of a loose part. They can think about counting, they can think about how do these things fit together, problem solving skills. It's unlimited, the learning that you could have with 200 coffee sleeves. So that's probably my favorite loose part right there. Now you're all going to start saving your coffee sleeves, I hope. I pull them out of the garbage can, but I probably shouldn't have said that. Here's another idea I want to share with you. Loose parts, again, I said it earlier, they provide novelty, complexity, and challenge. So here's an example of what I think is also a loose part. This is a kitty litter tray, was never used for cats. It's absolutely clean, got at the pet store or yard sale. And the beautiful thing about this is, while the substance and the tray itself don't change, what you might put in there as your loose parts can change. And that's based on your observation of the children. So here we have wooden bowls as one option of loose parts. Here I collected some plastic goblets that were see-through, and some were blue, added a little bit of different novelty. And over here are solid, good old napkin rings. I know many of you are going to ask what's in the bin, so I'll tell you it's cocoa bean hulls, and you can get them at gardening stores or like a feed store. I live out where there are feed stores for farm animals. Another great option for a sensory bin like this is corn cob hulls that you can get again at kind of a feed store situation. Sometimes they're used for lining the bottom of a rabbit cage, but they are non-toxic and not dusty. And I love them as a sensory bin, which in fact, again, is a loose part in my mind. I'm going to keep moving. All right, I'm doing okay. So bottom line, here's a couple other ideas about loose parts. I collect a lot of coasters. Not that my furniture needs to be protected because it's all pretty old, but this is a wooden coasters where you put your dish, your glass, so it doesn't get a ring on the wooden table. These are cardboard coasters. You can find coasters everywhere. They are such an amazing loose part. Children will play with them like cards. They will chew on them. They'll stack them. Coasters, you see coasters in a thrift store or yard sale, get them all. The other wonderful thing about it is look at, again, quantity. You're not just going to give them one or two. You're going to give them a whole set and see what they do with it. Over here, I couldn't resist. The only thing in this presentation I actually bought was these are egg cups. I don't use them for what they're designed for, but they were so delightfully tiny and the shape was so wonderful that I just knew toddlers and infants would play with them in a million different ways. So I collected those as well. You can imagine what my house looks like, right? Okay. I'm going to skip this one because I just want to get on to the last part of our time together. I wanted to give you some ideas around natural materials as loose parts. So everything I've shown you to date is more man-made. It might be plastic or something like that, which is fine. But my favorite loose parts come from nature, and most of them are free. It turns out you walk outside, there's loose parts everywhere. A loose part could be as simple as a leaf, a safe leaf. But what we have here, just for some examples, are gourds. A friend of mine grows these. She doesn't hollow them out or anything. They're just gourds. They're very smooth. They're really fun to drum on. Over here's just driftwood. And the great thing about driftwood is it comes pre-cleaned and there's no splinters. If you really look at driftwood, the ocean has already cleaned it for you. You might have to shake off the sand, but it's smooth. There are rarely splinters, and you can have big pieces of driftwood, small pieces. These are truly nature's loose parts. So a couple ideas there. I wanted to share with you to get you out there and believe what I'm saying about the value of nature and how we can find loose parts in nature. I'm going to share with you a quote by a medical doctor who is a big advocate of children being outside and in nature more. She says, "My wish is for every infant to be exposed to nature starting the first week of life. If children get an early and sustained exposure to nature, they will have the optimum potential for being and staying well emotionally, physically, and spiritually." That's very powerful to me. She is actually a doctor who actually prescribes, literally writes it down, says, get outside versus medication. She says, take your child outside. So what are we going to collect while we're outside? Here are some more ideas about natural objects as loose parts. These are, I'm sure you play with these, I would imagine. I call them tree cookies. They are basically just slices of tree. A wonderful resource for that in the next couple months is Christmas tree farms. You don't need to get a Christmas tree. You go in there and they cut off the bottom of the tree trunk, and you can get your tree cookies by the barrel. I clean them out every year. The texture children can explore here, the smell, all of those elements come into play when we're working with natural materials. Uh, Plastic doesn't have a smell. So think about the difference between a tree cookie and a plastic toy. Here's some pine cones that are very scented and fun to play with. And then a little hand broom, which is made from natural materials. This is an infant. I want you to notice. This is one of the younger children in my presentation. And all the material, all the information they can get through their senses really comes into play with natural materials. I'm doing okay. I keep checking my time. Couple more ideas about low cost or no cost, depending on where you live and who you can ask for materials, is this on the left. I want to point out that this looks very busy, but the fact is it's everything in this image on the left is a natural object except for the blue, and that's a scarf. So the scarf represents, maybe to a child, water or a river, stream going through. This was not created by an adult. The adult put out these materials and the children manipulate them and move them around. Those are truly loose parts. There's leaves here, there's a few rocks, some pumpkins. Nobody's telling the children what to do with these things, but there's a suggestion in what you offer the children. And the suggestion might be an unspoken suggestion, might be, this scarf might look like water. So step back and see what happens. Just a little cautionary tale here on the right is if you ever put anything out in a bucket, even a basket, please, please, please make sure it's draining. I have a need to make sure we are safe whenever there's a container that could contain water. It's a mosquito attractant, also a drowning hazard. So these all have holes in the bottom. These buckets on the right, they cannot hold water. They drain immediately. That's the first thing you do if you get any kind of container. This is just a setup here of the tree cookies, the slices, some little pieces of wood in the baskets. And again, they put it off in a corner. The children encounter it and they will explore it to their heart's content. So simple and free materials right there. These are a couple other ideas, not as completely natural because there's a couple plastic dinosaurs in there. You gotta have your dinosaurs. And I have yet to find one in nature that's real. So once in a while we add some plastic dinosaurs. What I want you to notice here is, again, how were these materials displayed? How were the loose parts shared with the children? If you had just put these on a tabletop without this frame, if you will, it's got a little bit of a lip here, you can see, by just a few inches. So it's got a wooden lip around the platform. That is so key for toddlers because in my experience of toddlers, part of their joy is to find materials on a table and swipe them off. They're all about clearing the decks. And again, not so much about putting them back on the table, but this lip, if you can find this kind of a little container or a platform, or even just put some wood on the edge of your table, it really helps children of this age focus their play and not be so much into just dumping. So that's just a little tip. That's why you'll see this kind of framed table in so many of my images. There's tree bark here. This is like a terracotta tube. So really, again, great textures, wonderful sensory experiences for the children with these loose parts from nature. Here's a wonderful access. You go to your car parts store, and that is an oil change tub. Of course, it wasn't used for that. It's absolutely clean, but just an inch of water, some rocks. Again, we have some tree cookies, maybe a few flowers. Again, these are loose parts. They can be manipulated, moved, interacted with, sorted, classified. Children can make patterns with these. All of the early math concepts that you are hoping to encourage and explore with the children. I have 5 minutes. Okay. I might actually make it to the end here. A couple more ideas about how loose parts from nature bring in sensory opportunities. On the left here, we have a picture of 3 girls who are well protected from the sun. I want you to notice, because if you're going to be outside, you better be ready for some hot sun, at least today. They have their hats on, they have their long sleeves, and this provider had a huge amount of lemons. So these aren't plastic, they are the real thing. They are collecting, they're squeezing. They're not necessarily making lemonade out of them, but they are loose parts from nature. So again, I would make sure that it was okay with families that they are essentially playing with lemons in this image. So I might check that out, that that's okay with the families in your care. Maybe lemons are important to them, and so I wouldn't wanna, disrespect them in that way. But in my experience, many families are okay with playing of the lemons. Also on the right here, we have some larger, snail shells of sort. Look at the colors, the textures, the bumpiness there. Plastic toys can't provide this kind of sensory experience. They just don't. So collecting that kind of thing, asking families or neighbors or your colleagues who might go to the beach or whatever is in your environment to bring in those materials. Because again, quantity, having a sufficient quantity of these things is key to working with toddlers in particular. And quantity always allows them to, again, kind of explore the more, the less. I have a pile, I need more, all those early math concepts. They also, loose parts, especially natural loose parts, provide you very unique challenge. So loose parts, these tree stumps could be considered loose parts because I know these children could move these tree stumps. They're not dug in, they're not stuck in the ground. Over here, you want to talk about challenge. Look at this child. She has decided to gather up the tan bark, the tree bark off of what was on these stumps and put it in a wheelbarrow, which is very hard to balance, very hard to balance. Now she is going to pick up that wheelbarrow and transport that tree bark. She created that challenge for herself, but the loose parts allowed for it. So again, things that can move about, be gathered, be sorted, be patterned, be classified, all of these are supporting their early math learning and science. So great challenges that the children create for themselves. So we're getting to the end here. I'm kind of stunned. I want you to just think for a minute. I'm not going to ask you to write in chat, but what is in your outdoor environment? You might be in the middle of a city and still have some elements of nature nearby, or even if you have a small patio, there's always something that you can derive from nature or enlist help with, enlist your community to gather these loose parts. I have barely ever paid a penny. I think the egg cups were the only thing I ever bought. And I've lived in urban, suburban, and rural environments, and I've always been able to gather and bring in these kinds of natural loose parts. So you can do it. Don't give up. If your enthusiasm is strong enough, you will get a nice library of loose parts. So again, I want to start to close out with another quote from Magda Gerber. If you don't know who she is, please Google her. She was formative in the forming of PITC, my organization, and a real mentor to many of us in the field. So this is a quote from Magda. The stimuli which nature provides is unparalleled. Even the youngest infant becomes fascinated by listening to birds, watching the movements of flies, butterflies, shadows, and leaves. Air circulation, temperature change, the playfulness of sunlight and shadow are strong stimuli to the senses. Think about that. So much there that has to do with patterning and sequencing and classifying. flies to butterflies. It's rich with those math concepts, and it's excellent way to help children learn is to get them outside. Don't be afraid of the worms. Let's see. These last couple slides I want to share with you very quickly because we're at time. I have 3 slides here, and you will be getting this PowerPoint, I believe, after our time together this evening. My agency is here, PITC. I'm not going to hop into that website, but it's simply pitc.org. I have a couple Pinterest boards if you want to go there. I've added the link there. There's a couple resources here that are bilingual around loose parts and written in Spanish, but also the English version. I'm going to go to the last couple and just highlight a few things for you, and then we'll say goodnight. This is a list of websites that I just adore. They have both elements of inspiring you to use loose parts as well as natural objects. So there's really a mix here of great websites. And my last slide is some books, some publications. If you are intrigued by the need for children to be outside and loose parts, please read this book, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. I feel so strongly about all learning can happen with these loose parts, be it science or math or social emotional development. It can happen in a very natural setting with these incredibly creative materials that you can find for almost no cost. So I hope I've given you a couple inspirations. You can always find me at PITC. I really value the work you're doing and your care of infants and toddlers and older children. And I hope our paths cross again at some point. And thanks so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate your time. Take care, everyone.